Batteries, or needs? Powered up, and then went right straight to red and off. Is that the indication?
That is. That tells us that
Two of these
they
guys?
didn't get turned off.
How many?
Two.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. Yes, that is working. Daryl, I think it is good to know if all your other skills fail, you can certainly have a career as a battery changer. Good at that. And good morning. Having completed a study in Ecclesiastes, I am the filler-inner for a couple of weeks before Chris begins a study of He Will Tell You Something sometime, once he decides where we're going. But for the next couple of weeks, I'll fill in with some information from James. This week we'll be talking about James the man. Next week, a little bit from the book of James. The only thing I would ask is, in this first study at least, we do have quite a bit of ground to cover. I would ask if you'd hold your comments and your questions till the end, please. Make sure we get through everything that we need to. Okay, so who actually wrote the book of James? There's that old kid's joke, who's buried in Grant's tomb? Obviously Grant, but makes you wonder why they ever asked the question. So why do we ask the question, who wrote the book of James? Obvious answer is James, but it turns out that that is not a completely satisfactory answer, because in the New Testament, there are 4 men who carry the name of James. So this morning we're going to look at who are they, which one actually wrote the book of James, and who cares anyway. We'll try to cover all of that. So first we try to identify the 4 James. This is the first one, James number 1. This is the one who's the son of Zebedee. He's the brother of John. According to the account in Matthew 4, on the very same day that Jesus walked the beach, walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw these 2 brothers, the 2 fishermen, Simon and Andrew. He called them to follow him, walked on down the beach, and saw 2 other brothers. This is James and John. Just like the first pair, they left their nets and their boats, and their father, that's Zebedee, he was mending nets with them, Mark says. They immediately also followed after Jesus. Business they left behind must have been something of a partnership with Simon and Andrew. Luke adds that a little bit of information. A big enough business that it seems they were even some additional hired servants, according to what Matthew had said. Mark in chapter 1, verse 20. Generally supposed that of the brothers, James was the older of the 2, but that's only based on the fact that his name is mentioned first. Of course, John seems to be the one who developed a closer relationship with Jesus. Story for another day. Now, as for the mother, she was part of a small company of women who also followed Jesus from Galilee, and in some sense must have ministered to his needs. This we learn over here in 27th chapter of Matthew. There was Mary Magdalene. There's another Mary, mother of James, but this is a different James we'll get to, and the mother of Zebedee's children. Now, in the Gospel of Mark, there's that information that these same three ladies, presumably, are Mary and Salome. That would make Mrs. Zebedee, the mother of James and John, this woman whose name's Salome. So the mother of James, number one, would be Salome. One more juicy tidbit to put in here. If this is the same trio that we find standing here together with Jesus' mother, Mary, at the foot of the cross, like here in John 19:25, if it's the same set of ladies, and that makes pretty good sense, then you would have in the quartet Mary, the mother of Jesus, Mary Magdalene, the other Mary, who's the mother of the other James, and also identified here as the wife of Clopas, and then the fourth member of the group, Salome, or James' mother. But note that she is called by John the sister of Mary, or Jesus' mother. Now think what that means. That would mean that James and John, sons of Zebedee and Salome, would be first cousins to Jesus. Okay. James is one of the four fishing partners. He was at Simon's house very early in Jesus' ministry. He was there to witness the healing of Simon's mother-in-law. And there would have been some time after this, Matthew says, when Jesus assembled all of those apostles, and their names are there for the first time, including James, son of Zebedee. That's when he sent them out to heal diseases and to evict evil spirits. Only 3 of the 12 are named as being part of what you might call the inner circle with Jesus. You have Peter, James, and John. They accompanied him when he went in to heal the daughter of Jairus. You'd find that in Mark 5. I should just say, this would have been one of my mother-in-law's favorite lessons. She dearly loved to turn the pages in her Bible. And the more scriptural references you had in a lesson, the better she liked it. If that's not your thing and you want to just follow the screen, that's okay too. But there's quite a bit to learn from the intricacies of this little genealogy. So that was in Mark 5 and 37. He's doing the healing. Then there was this other occasion, the familiar one in Matthew 17. Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him up on this high mountain, and there he was transfigured before them. Must have been an incredible sight from what is written. Jesus' face was transfigured. It shone like the sun. The 3 of them somehow not just saw, but recognized Moses and Elijah there, talking with Jesus. Then that voice came out of the brightness, out of the cloud, and God said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him." The part that we read right over is the 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John. They fell on their faces, so afraid. For some reason, Jesus named these 2 brothers the sons of thunder. We don't really know why. Maybe they were the loud and boisterous type, although you'd think that would be Peter. Maybe they were the rowdy members of the tribe. Don't know. Maybe he had reference in calling them sons of thunder to their temperament. And the reason I say that is about this little incident in Luke 9. There's this Samaritan village, remember, and they were mistreated so that they asked Jesus for permission to call down fire from heaven to destroy the village, sort of like what Elijah did at Mount Carmel. You probably remember Jesus denied them permission. So Anyway, the two brothers seem to be somewhat presumptuous. You learn this over here. First time, I guess, is in Mark 10. They dared to ask Jesus for positions of prominence or priority in his kingdom. They wanted to sit beside him, places of honor. In Matthew's account, it was the mother, Salome, who instituted the request. I don't know, maybe she thought Jesus couldn't possibly refuse the request from his auntie Salome. I don't know. It kind of makes sense that way. Jesus took the occasion, though, to teach something very important to them, and I guess to us as well, a lesson that affects us all. He explained that in the Gentile world, the world we live in, people customarily compete for authority, for power, for position. Some people call it a dog-eat-dog world. I mean, it's just the way of the common world. Each one looks out for himself, for number one, only for the welfare of his own little world. This is when Jesus said, "It shall not be so among you. Whoever would be great among you, he is to be servant of all." And then he pointed to his own example, the one who gave his life a ransom for many. And Jesus found himself in that same smaller company in the garden at the end of his life. Remember, he asked the three to stay and to watch with him. Peter, James, and John fell asleep. As the old spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Then after Jesus' death and his resurrection, there's a story in John chapter 21. James and 6 of the others are out fishing upon the Sea of Tiberias, which we recognize to be Galilee also. They'd been casting their nets unsuccessfully on one side of the boat. Sun came up, they saw a man standing on the shore. They didn't know who it was. And the man called out, as fellow fishermen will do, "Having any luck?" No, they said. The man said, "Well, cast your nets on the other side of the boat." That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? But they did. And you remember the story, the nets couldn't hold all the fish they caught. And by that fact alone, they recognized the man on the shore was Jesus. By the time they got the boat and the net and the fish to shore, there's already a fire going, fish and bread are cooking. And, you know, truly, this was the Last Supper, the last meal with Jesus. Except, of course, it wasn't supper. They had breakfast together, the last breakfast. One final mention of this James in the Bible. Here's a note over here in Acts chapter 12. James had been killed with a sword. The murderer is none other than Herod. This would be the father of Herod Agrippa that Paul sort of kind of almost nearly converted, as the story is told in Acts chapter 26. Details surrounding the death of James, son of Zebedee, we don't know. It's generally assumed that he was the second of the apostles to die after Judas Iscariot, and that he was put to death by Herod for his allegiance to Jesus. It just illustrates what Jesus said about this is the greatest love one may have, to lay down his life for his friends. It's about all we know about James number 1. So we move into James number 2, the second one. He was also an apostle, identified as such there in Matthew chapter 10, the son of Alphaeus. Back in the 9th chapter, we learn that the apostle Matthew, also called Levi, was a tax collector. But interesting detail in Mark, the 2nd chapter, Levi is also referred to as the son of Alphaeus. If it's the same Alphaeus, this would make James and Matthew, or Levi, the third set of brothers among the apostles. Could be. And the mother in this case, you got over here to Matthew chapter 27 for this one, calls her Mary also, names another brother Joseph. Some say that this phrase in John 19 and 25, his mother's sister, would apply to this woman, this Mary, the wife of Clopas. If it does, that would make this James also the cousin of Jesus. Now, there's no way to know. Decide for yourself if it really matters. But it is an interesting little possibility. Okay, we go over here to Mark chapter 15, where this James is called James the Lesser, or somehow to distinguish him from the first James, the brother of John. Doesn't mean that he was smaller or that he was inferior in any way, or less important even. Just for whatever reason, this is little James or Jimmy. Okay, the other one. What else do we know about him? No, that's it. If there was any resentment over the nickname that he assumed, any jealousy of the better known James, that's not recorded. I think from that alone, we can learn a certain lesson in humility, how a disciple of Jesus may be working sort of backstage, quietly or in the shadows, while the more prominent ones take the higher spotlight roles. That was James number 2. Number 3, we find him referenced in Luke chapter 6 and verse 16. He's the father of the apostle Judas. That would be the other Judas, not Judas Iscariot. You also find him in Acts 1:13. Well, that's all there is about this James. I suppose his greatest contribution is that there's so little said of him, we may move on, and it makes the lesson shorter. So we'll go to James number 4. This last one is mentioned in Matthew chapter 13, where the Jews in the hometown of Jesus and Jews of Nazareth were astonished at the teaching of this one that they considered just carpenter's son. His wisdom and certain of his mighty works astonished them. Of course, they thought they knew the carpenter's son. They knew his brothers. They knew James and Joseph and Simeon, Judas. They knew his sisters. So this James is son of Mary, brother, or we would say half-brother to Jesus. This James must have been in the family group when they were standing outside here in Matthew chapter 12. Jesus was talking to the people. His mother and his brothers wanted to speak with him. Jesus surprised them all when he said, well, who is my mother? Who are my brothers? Certainly Jesus meant no disrespect toward his family here, but he made rather an important point, something that is good for us to recognize also. He gestured toward his disciples and he said, behold, my mother, my brothers. Whoever does the will of my Father, that's my family, that's my brother, that's my sister, that's my mother. There is a closeness among those who have like faith that brings them with the shared hope closer than any of blood kin ever could be. We share a future together, not just a past. There are some in my physical family who have a great fondness for exploring genealogy. My brother has traced it back 5 ways that you can be on the Mayflower and 12 ways descended from royalty in this place and that. So much time and fondness for the past. But our family, we concentrate upon the future. We'll be together forever. Only one way, not 5 ways, just one way, but we know where we're going. It matters. James, number 4, he must have been in this little family gathering. I think I went the wrong way. Here we go. Try this one. Second chapter of John. This is the first miracle at Cana. Wedding feast. Jesus performed the first miracle there, turned the water into wine. Afterward, his mother and his brothers, some of his disciples also, accompanied him in traveling to Capernaum for a short stay there. James surely was hanging around his older brother to a certain extent, seeing things, hearing things, absorbing things. But at this point in his life, he's not really buying it. Not yet. Jesus noted a prophet is not without honor save in his own country, or you might say within his own family. Perhaps that's what's going on here. He's too familiar. There was this point where James and the other brothers urged him to go up to Jerusalem, John chapter 7. They did not understand who Jesus was, what he was doing, his need to observe the timing of his sacrifice. Notice verse 5. At this point, James, the others, his brothers, they still didn't believe in him. Important because of what's coming. Now, how much time James might have spent in listening to the teachings of his brother, we don't know. But he did come to believe in him eventually because of what we learn here in Acts chapter 1. He's part of this group of disciples who were continuing together in one accord in prayer. We presume that he participated in the election of Matthias as the replacement apostle for Judas. And then Paul says, 1 Corinthians 15:7, that after his resurrection, Jesus was seen by Peter, then by all 12 apostles, then by more than 500 disciples, and then by James. Then again by all the apostles, and finally by Paul himself. Just sort of read between the lines, but possibly that meant that James had a personal, a private visitation. Don't know. But somewhere, sometime, somehow, James was converted, the half-brother. Probably on the day of Pentecost, if not before, because by this time he's in the group. When Paul went up to Jerusalem, sometime later, he relates this in first chapter of Galatians. When that happened, after Paul's conversion, he met with Peter, he says, for about 15 days. And then he also saw, whom he identified, James, the Lord's brother. But other of the apostles I did not see, except James, the Lord's brother. This seems to be calling James, brother of Jesus, an apostle. If so, that would be talking about James, son of Alphaeus. That could be. If indeed he was the cousin of Jesus, brother in the New Testament can sometimes be close relative or cousin. So it just may indicate a kinsman. So there's that possibility. He's talking about James Alphaeus. It wouldn't have to be, because again, the term apostle, it applied to more than the original 12 men, or 13 when you throw in Matthias, the replacement for Judas. Obviously, we need to expand it just a little more, and you have to include Paul. That makes 14. But then you have Barnabas called an apostle in Acts chapter 14. You have Andronicus and Junius are referred to as apostles in Romans 16:7. I don't know how many apostles you have by now. Jesus himself is called chief apostle. But it may simply mean a messenger. Doesn't always have to be apostle in the sense of the original 12. So anyway, James, brother of Jesus, became a Christian of some distinction in the church at Jerusalem, occupied a position of leadership among the brethren, at least by the time of Acts 12, when Peter was escaping from prison. He is a prominent man in the church of Jerusalem. Okay, back to Galatians chapter 2. Paul's describing here a later visit to Jerusalem in which he took, along with him, Barnabas and Titus. They were going to discuss the treatment of Gentiles in the field. And there's where he called James a pillar of the church, along with Peter and John, back in verse 9. He indicated that he had secured their cooperation in his mission to the Gentiles. And actually, get down here to Acts 15, it was James who, at that point, made the eloquent appeal before the council at Jerusalem that they would do it Paul's way. Then again in Acts chapter 21, when Paul journeyed to Jerusalem, he's gladly met by the brethren, met with James and all the elders, verse 18. So, James, brother of Jesus, was by this point a leader in the church at Jerusalem. So, James number 4 is widely regarded as the one who wrote the book of James. Sort of process of elimination. Can't be number 1. He's already been killed by Herod by this time. Not likely to be number 2, the son of Alphaeus. He's one of the original apostles. Surely he would have identified himself as such when he's writing the epistle of James. Others call themselves apostles when they are. Number 3 is totally unknown. And that only leaves number 4, the brother of Jesus, and this leader of the church in Jerusalem, to be the one who wrote the epistle of James. What lessons are there to learn? I think there's something that kind of relates to what we already have figured out about the personality of the half-brother of Jesus. If you delve into the letter, there's more, of course, but even before that, just from what we've talked about so far, I think it is remarkable that James, brother of Jesus, does not play off that blood kinship, never takes advantage of his unique, his intimate relationship with him. He never calls attention to the fact. He doesn't say, well, as my brother Jesus would say, as Jesus used to tell me. There doesn't seem to be any of that. He's kind of like John, who doesn't even use his own name when he begins to speak of Jesus. Maybe it made a deep impression upon James. Back there on that occasion, when he saw Jesus ignoring his unbelieving kindred in the flesh, and he pointed around to his disciples and said, these are my brethren. Maybe that made an impression on him. I think there may have been another point, turning point for him, when from the cross, Jesus turned over his mother's welfare to John. John 19. Must have been a blow to James, brother of Jesus. Kind of like a slap in the face, because by Jewish law and tradition, if the oldest son died and the father's already dead, which we assume about Joseph because he's never mentioned again after Jesus' adult years, then father's dead, oldest son is dead, then the responsibility for the family, for the care of the mother certainly would pass to the next oldest son. Presumably James as the first one mentioned there, again in Matthew 13:55. But remember, at that point, at the foot of the cross, James was not yet a believer. So Jesus gave the job to his trusted friend, to John. I don't know, maybe that shook James up. Pure conjecture. Maybe that made him angry. Maybe that made him cause to look within himself. Something to think about. James reminds us sometimes people do take advantage of second chance. He may have doubted his brother. He may have rejected the gospel the first time he heard it. But eventually the truth took hold. And we are delighted to learn that he did turn into responsible. He might have been a late bloomer, but he rendered service in the vineyard. Good man. I think it's something we all realize. There's no direct blessing in merely being related to a Christian. Heaven cannot be reached on the coattails of another. Paul says each one works out his own salvation, Philippians 2:12. It's God's salvation, but the working out of it in your life, that's a personal responsibility. It's been said before, all Christians are first generation Christians. It's not a matter of inheritance. It's a matter of individual birth. The spiritual family of God is made up of those who personally decide and work out their own salvation. Something else that comes to my mind about James and what he has to say, especially the way he writes about it later, and we'll get into that some next week. There are two kinds of humility. There's the forced one, and there's a chosen one. Both are, I think, well illustrated here. There's one that it's sort of forced upon us, like some humiliating defeat. We suffer through some circumstances that are beyond our control, and we recognize we must simply endure, and we try to do this graciously. We make the best of an unfortunate circumstance. Among the apostles, you may think of James the Lesser. That's just what he was born to. It's not his fault, but that's where he is. Make the best of it. He takes the back seat to the more famous James, son of Zebedee. But just there, you see the example of one who does his work anyway, quietly, accepts without resentment or bitterness whatever his lot is in life, seeks to bring glory to God in his own way. He can still love and serve no matter. Now that's the forced humility, the circumstance you did not choose. But there's another kind of humility, and that's the one I think we see here in James, the one who's the brother of Jesus. This is humility that is chosen deliberately. The example is in John chapter 13, isn't it? When Jesus washed his disciples' feet, not because he had to, because he chose to do so. He wanted to serve. And by the end of that little lesson, he enjoins us all to look to that example when we love and we serve one another, not because we have to, but because we choose to. We're going to step outside of what James really had to say, of course, because Paul picks up the same theme in the second chapter of Philippians when he's talking about what really goes on inside of us. He says, fulfill my joy that you should be, let nothing be done through vanity or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind. Let each esteem others better than themselves. That's humility as a choice. He said in verse 4, look not everyone on his own things, his own interests, but on the designs of things of others as well. Because he said, verse 5, let this mind be in you, which was in Christ Jesus. That's the way he lived. Even though he was in the form of God, he took upon himself the form of a servant. And this is for us. This is the teaching of Jesus, of Paul, of John, and of the James we're looking at. One of the major messages, certainly in the book of James, he reminds us in chapter 4, verse 6, God resists the proud. He gives grace to the humble. Calls upon us to submit ourselves to God, to humble ourselves in the sight of the Lord. Even though Jesus had a position in heaven, a position of great honor, respect, and glory, chose to empty himself all of that, to make himself of no reputation, Paul says, just in order to serve, to obey his Father. James likewise declined to showcase himself just because he's brother of the Messiah. Rather, he serves as this humble servant. Rejoice not in his birth, but in all that he might do in serving his brother. And that's James, the man. We'll talk next week a little bit about James and his teaching. Okay, now all those things you've been holding back, you really wanted to say, this is your time. And you can start any moment now. Okay, well, what do you got to say?
I've always been very hesitant about the vein of this James being a cousin to Jesus, because that plays right into the hand of the Catholics who want to protect Mary's perpetual virginity. They want to strip any and all mention of Jesus' brothers and just make them all cousins.
Yeah. Yeah. When you have an axe to grind or a particular position to justify, it's not a problem to twist things to fit. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Michael?
It makes sense this would be Ford's brother because of his position as a leader, apparently even among the Jews there.
Yeah.
And he's writing to the Jews, 12 tribes of people, the Jewish brethren. So right now.
But isn't it fascinating that this all happened after the death and resurrection, and his belief came later, and just the way this thing unfolds? I think for many people, there is not, even many Bible scholars who have not really delved into who these people are. James is James, and they easily confuse James, son of Zebedee, with James, brother of Jesus. Sure. Next.
There's even the exact same problem with the book of Jude, and who wrote the book of Jude. I mean, it's the exact same arguments with James. Is he really the brother of Jesus, or what?
Yeah, don't know. Okay. Yeah, that would be another week to look at Jude, the man, and Jude, the book. Okay. Yeah, Chris, was that a scratch, or that was I thought it was going to be a very important comment right at this point. And are you ready to tell us what we need to prepare for in 2 weeks? No, not yet. Okay. Okay, Steve? I'm sorry, go ahead, say again.
They're going to try to teach
The
the Godhead.
Godhead. Okay, thank you. Okay, Steve?
Now, there's the brothers of Jesus are cousins, and what are the sisters?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. But again, it comes down to, if you're looking for justification rather than information, you can kind of pull whatever you need here and there. Sure. Yeah. Anybody else? Question, comment? Okay. We will shut down a little early. You may visit among yourselves.
We'll go over it later.